It is July 27th, 2023. Welcome to Axiom News Live, where every Thursday at 2 o'clock Eastern and 7 o'clock in the UK, we engage strengths to catalyze change. Here we start with what's strong rather than what's wrong, as we lift up the stories of those people whose work in the world we become connected to and care about. I'm your host, Peter Pula. Today I am joined by Derek Peebles. Derek is a founding member of the Common Good Alliance. He'll share news with us today of an effort to bring Black Wall Street to Cincinnati, Ohio. Derek is also Senior Director for Inclusive Economy at the American Sustainable Business Network. Sean Loney is Managing Partner of Encompass Co-op and will speak to us about steps toward a precedent-setting possibility unfolding in Winnipeg, Alberta. Welcome to each of you, Derek and Sean.
Thank you.
Hey, Peter. Nice to see you, Derek.
Nice to see you. Glad to be here.
Let's begin with why it is you said yes to joining Axiom News Live today. Derek, we met for the first time, well, possibly not. We may have met a number of times over a period of about 12 or so years, but we connected yesterday, and maybe just begin with why it was that you said yes and were willing to join our stream today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I really kind of enjoyed our conversation yesterday. I've known about Axiom News for some time, and I've been blessed to have been under the mentorship of Peter Block, and I think that was a lot of the reason why I found out about the invitation, and then felt after our conversation yesterday that these are some important topics to talk about.
Beautiful. Thanks, Derek. And you, Sean, you've been with us before. You're also a co-host and a member of our media collaborative, and you're back. So why this time?
I think, I'm looking forward to chatting with Derek for sure. I've heard a lot about your work, Derek, and you're in Cincinnati, Ohio. You said?
That's right.
I'm in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Peter placed Winnipeg in Alberta. I don't think that's.
I'm sorry to everyone. Oh my Lord! Fact check.
We just trying to keep the mail down.
Yes.
Winnipeggers might object to that.
Here.
And vice versa. But for me, I just really feel optimistic about what we're about to turn a corner. We've been, for 30, 40 years blaming low-income people for being poor. There's something wrong with them. And I think we're beginning to realize that and lean into a new paradigm where people are poor because of failure of the systems that they're interacting with. And it's a strength-based approach. People can do well. They can thrive if they've got surrounded by the love and compassion that's needed. And I'm here in Winnipeg, very high. It's a largest concentration of Indigenous people in Canada in a major city. And so we're surrounded by this Indigenous wisdom. Their economies are about putting love and compassion right into the mainstream functioning of economies. And I think that's what these conversations are all about, Peter. And always looking forward to Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern and feeling great about what's about to unfold.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you both for joining us. So, Derek, we're going to spend the first part of our time together presencing, I guess, the work that you are doing in Cincinnati. You are a co-founder of the Common Good Alliance. And when we look into the Common Good Alliance, we see that there is an effort through that alliance to create what you're calling Black Wall Street in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I know that there are many, many layers to that, but maybe we can begin with, can you say just briefly what the Common Good Alliance is all about, and perhaps a little bit about Black Wall Street in particular, just to get our game started?
Yeah, so, and thank you. Common Good Alliance was really Um, I would say a continuation of work that Cincinnatians and myself got together around this concept of an economics of compassion. And what that concept really means is really focused on when we look at communities, what lens are we looking at that community through? Is it a possibilities lens or is it a lens of deficiency? And I think
Mm,
oftentimes as humans, we're looking at communities, we're looking at neighborhoods, and innately we're identifying the problems. And when you're a community leader that's applying for a grant to work with youth in a community, the first thing that you're asked is, what are the needs? Well, we're coming together to really focus on what's possible by bringing people together and focusing on the assets, meaning the gifts that they actually bring to the table. Because we're living in an era where traditional economic practices and frameworks are really being challenged. And this concept of the economics of compassion uh, is emerging here in Cincinnati as a viable alternative to catalyzing community well-being and prosperity. And so this concept really recognizes that our current economic system, it's limited in its ability to address the needs of society
mm.
and the environment. And so we're bringing people together to shift mindsets towards a more holistic understanding of what we deem valuable, um, but more or less a more holistic understanding of value. And so the Common Good Alliance was really established to actually do that, bring people together with these type of mindsets based on possibilities, but to actually organize capital and to be able to inject that into a community by focusing on what the people actually want. Um, and even in marginalized communities, we're really looking at the flow of the dollar
Mhm.
and and the circulation of that. So we're taking a place-based approach and focusing on various pillars of the alliance, which is arts and culture. And, that involves us celebrating the history that artists have brought to Cincinnati. Looking at land, because it's becoming more apparent that you really can't generate Black wealth without owning land. And
Mhm.
so that's a real focus area of ours. Looking at, of course, business enterprise, but also looking at um, how we organize capital in a way that allows for regular citizens to also want to invest in their community. And so our goal is to really create conditions that keeps the flow of the dollar circulating.
And so I understand that there's work around the ownership of land and architecture that is aligned with and reflective of the black culture, black perspective, and black feeling. And when we spoke a bit yesterday, I was really curious to hear about some of the nuances of
Hmm.
how does black culture work its way into art, work its way into architecture. How are these things become connected, and how does it feel and look when things unfold in that direction?
Sure, sure. Well, there was a story back, I think, in the 70s, where we talk about like the culture of hip hop and where that was birthed from. Well, hip hop culture really started out of South Bronx in the 70s, and it was an outlet for young people to be able to creatively express themselves. And within an environment and within a local economy that was dilapidating. And so these kids really didn't have the opportunity for their parents to buy them drums. So they started beating on garbage cans. Um, when you think about graffiti art, you know, the dominant narrative is that that's mainly vandalism. And I agree with a lot of that. But when you talk to kids back from those days that were writing graffiti on trains, they would say, well, this is the best way for a lot of people to see our art, because we're not going to be in an art studio. And so that similar concept really drops the feeling around how the Black community really feels about the local economy. We don't feel like we have ownership of our own neighborhoods.
Mm.
And literally, we don't have
Right,
ownership
right.
of our neighborhoods. And so when you look at marginalized communities, and you see when development comes into a neighborhood and they start rebuilding everything, and oftentimes it's often built in a design that doesn't reflect that community's character or doesn't reflect that community's history. And so we're organizing here in Cincinnati a small group, and I mean a small group because there's not a lot of them, Black architects that are really working with us on the Common Good Alliance on the pillar where we're focusing on acquisition of land. Because again, we feel that you really can't generate Black wealth without ownership of land. And so we're very intentional about working with a Black architect, because we know that through lived experience, we're able to connect um, different Black culture, which is really inherent in arts, to what we want our communities to feel like, what we want our communities to look like, what type of businesses we want there, what type of activities we want going on for young people. And so we're having conversations with architects, and we're working with one right now, um, who we met with last weekend, and for the first time, we found out that he was a music producer, and we didn't know that, so we was all just kind of amazed. And he was like, "Well, yeah," he was like, "Being a music producer is actually what got me into architecture." And he was like, he made the statement that, when I think about architecture, I look at architecture like producing a record. And that's really the kind of synergy that you want there, because music tells a story. And so it makes sense that it would be directly linked, because when you look at Black history, a lot of our history is rooted in arts and culture. And when you look at, for instance, the hip hop movement that started in the 70s, well, it started out of a small community of people who were coming from broken families, broken communities, that used what they had in the streets to make music. And now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. But Black people don't really own a lot of that share of wealth
Mm.
that hip hop culture has created. Um, so it's important how we link arts and culture to architecture, because it directly links to how we want to feel in our own neighborhoods.
All right. So you're working with.
Derek,
Go ahead, Sean.
well, you gave me the feels there talking about the economics of compassion. I just wondered if you could tell us a bit about what that means to you. How does that, what's present for you about the economics of compassion? I love the term.
Sure, yeah. I think it's really about the importance of shifting mindsets. And, you know, when I think about the economics of compassion, I think of an analogy that's often used in the dominant narrative, that when we look at data that shows us that we're looking at a community of 5,000 residents with an annual household income of $20,000 a year, our data is going to suggest that this is a marginalized community that is not worth investing in, unless you want to gentrify it, you know. because then you have to wait till the property values get so low to where the developers come in and buy the land cheap, and then they make these expensive developments that people in the community can't afford. So it's really about shifting mindsets again towards a more holistic understanding of value, and that cannot be overstated. So I mean, this really involves the economics of compassion is a mindset essentially that involves reevaluating what we consider valuable and recognizing new forms of defining and accessing private, social, and public capital as viable resources for creating an economy that's local, that keeps the flow of the dollar circulating. It all requires us to think beyond traditional metrics when we're thinking about our economy. And uh, just real quick, another way to look at the concept of economics of compassion, it's also an approach, right, to how we work with communities that works to really foster collaboration through spanning boundaries that shift focus away from this deficiency based mindset and instead emphasizing the strengths of individuals and groups. So, this type of engagement is really powerful for organizations that are advocating for an inclusive economy. And it also encourages ownership and accountability because a lot of people in marginalized communities don't feel like if they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to change something that they can. And that's often because they're looked at as somebody, a person who can't change anything because of the traditional way that we look at data. So the economics of compassion is really shifting that around. Instead of focusing on what's deficient, let's focus on what's possible. And then let's take those possibilities and let's begin to build that community from the inside out in ways, again, that keep the dollars circulating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You spoke of land acquisition, Derek. How are things progressing on that front?
Yes, well, actually, we're in the process of acquiring um, a piece of land in a historic neighborhood in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the community of Evanston. And the the RFQ, which is kind of like a RFP, went out because the land that we want to acquire is actually owned by by the Port Authority in their land bank. And so our approach is acquiring land through land banking. Is going to be kind of our first type of scale, if you will. But our conversations are going very well because we have been able to talk about this in a different way uh, that really allows for the community to have ownership of the development that happens. And so um, we have a lot of people, including, the Cincinnati mayor, who have talked to us about this approach and this idea as a way of being very valuable. And so right now we're in the process of acquiring our first piece of land. So this RFQ is due by August 11th, and I think we'll hear pretty soon whether or not we'll be able to have site control. But there's about four other properties in the city that we're looking at and developing proposals for as well.
All right, so you're looking at the acquisition of several properties. Are they in the same area, or are they spread around? What's the approach to the acquisition? What's the
Sure.
approach
Well,
really look like?
yeah. So we're really looking in neighborhoods where we already have a deep impact and deep relationships, and so if you're looking at Cincinnati, Ohio, those neighborhoods are Bond Hill and Roseline, and then Evanston um, community, and some other ones that we're looking at, but they're pretty. I wouldn't say scattered around, but we're primarily looking at neighborhoods where there's a predominant population of people of color.
All right, and do you have rough notions about what will happen with perhaps the first property or the other ones you're considering, or do you go to community once the land has been acquired and explore then what to do, or do you have sort of rough principles around how things might look?
Sure. Well, essentially, there are things that we have to do once we get site control, which involves community engagement. And so, we're already talking with people in the community, such as the neighborhood council, other institutions kind of in that community. And so we're really looking at the approach of how we can uh, take land, develop it in a way that represents the community character, but also allows for residents to invest in the project as well. And I can get in deeper in how that works from a fund kind of standpoint.
Right.
But
So it doesn't sound like the idea is that a small group of investors maintains and controls it. You're looking to open up the possibility for investment to the community in the properties when it happens to them.
that's
Okay.
right. And the vehicle we're creating for that is called a diversified community investment fund.
Okay. Okay. What's next? What are the next steps in this process? I mean, you mentioned you've got the proposal to go in August 11th.
Yep.
What are the if we look out, say 3 to 5 steps, what seems to come next?
Well, acquiring the site control for the land, and then once that happens, then we get into community engagement by promoting this narrative of an economics of compassion as an invitation, right, to bring community residents into this process. See, oftentimes when developers are engaging communities, it's oftentimes, you know, first of all, that engagement doesn't typically happen until uh, you know ground has already been broken and the building starts to happen. And so we're going in on the early approach and promoting this concept of the economics of compassion as a way to invite community residents in to talk about what they want their community to look like, feel like, um, and what type of local economy they would support, right? Um, so that's going to be a process of engagement that'll be prolonged and ongoing. But the other step is developing this diversified community investment fund where we're going to be developing in a way that allows, again, for community people to invest and for residents to be able to invest in their own housing. Um, and so those are kind of the steps that we're taking next.
Right on. Okay. Can I ask you, what might you like, want, or need from members of your community or people in your network to make all of that come together as wonderfully well as you'd like it to?
Well, of course, we always need capital.
Right.
But this is also, I see, because there's not a whole lot of communities that are doing this type of approach. And I really think that, the process that we're undertaking could really be a case study that could be shared around the country. So, through my other hat at the American Sustainable Business Network, um, we're an organization of small business members and different other organizations that are focused on sustainability, but they're also we work with a group of investors that are looking at alternative ways of investing their money because people want their money to make an impact, and so this is a model that really allows for um, more ownership, but also it allows for the community to actually generate wealth in this way by also working with people outside of the community. And so um, those are kind of some of the things that we're looking forward to. And I think hopefully by the fall, we're going to be convening about 50 or so folks that we're going to be introducing this alliance to, and we're going to be identifying gifts and figuring out where people want to help us.
So, Peter, I can see where you're saying, "Oh, this Derek is awesome. He fits right into the kind of stories that we want to tell here on Axiom." This is really exciting, Derek. You made a comment there that you want other communities in your situation, other nonprofits, to be looking and saying, "This is a good case study." Can you comment a bit about that, but in the context of where were you, how were you feeling 5 years ago, and what's different now? And then where do you see things going? And what's different? What's happening other than just the tools you're using? But what's the mindset? Is there a mindset shift? You're using different tools? What's happening underneath?
Well, sure. So, the work of catalyzing community prosperity and well-being, because it's important to talk about the social determinants of health and linking the well-being of a community to the economics of a community. And so it's a lot like linking the micro assets to the macro environment, and that's asset-based community development language. So this whole alliance is really going to involve really implementing initiatives that generate long-term benefits for both individuals and society as a whole by leveraging existing community assets, those assets, i.e., meaning people, in creative ways. And so these examples can really, in these case studies, can include renewable energy ventures. It can include investing and inviting the community to create local food systems, and we have neighborhoods where there could be possibilities for regenerative agriculture. We have a huge cooperative business network here in Cincinnati, and so this also allows us to get into investing in shared infrastructure projects. And so these initiatives, these studies that we're going to be doing, will also help create jobs while simultaneously protecting the environment and promoting social well-being, by ensuring access to basic services such as healthcare or education. These approaches really have a significant impact on our conversations around what the economy is going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years. And so what I would hope happens in the next several years is that we begin to have a mindset shift, that we begin to calm down our rhetoric, because we're also dealing with this backlash against ESG and wokeness, right? And then with the latest Supreme Court actions, with affirmative action being struck down, a lot of people are worried about funding for diversity initiatives. And so I think in the next few years, we're going to see kind of a shift in countering the narrative against wokeness, but better yet, just involving people more in the process of the development of their local economy in their neighborhood. When we talk about climate change, a lot of the language that's used in those conversations are not terms that people in marginalized communities, a lot of them would understand. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what we're doing is translating as well by changing the conversation. And we do this through the 6 conversations that created by Peter Block. And so I would say, looking at kind of the past, I would say 10 years ago, we were just now starting to have these conversations on what is the possibility of the conversations we can have. Now we've had those conversations, and now we're looking at, okay, let's actually do something about it. Let's start organizing capital. Let's start focusing on building local economies and community one by one, place by place. And so I think in the next 5 years, we're going to be shifting our mindsets from looking at communities where you may have 5,000 families with an annual household of 20,000, shifting away from looking at that statistic as marginal to focusing on the possibility that, okay, you have 5,000 families with an annual household income of 20,000 a year. That's $100 million annually in spending power. And you're not going to be able to improve that community's local economy if 99.5% of those dollars are leaving the community as soon as it goes in. And by showing that people are able to actually take ownership in their neighborhoods, then we begin to talk to investors about, putting their money where their mouth is. It's kind of like if they want to invest for impact, let's invest through place-based strategies that allows for the wealth generation of people that have been historically exiled from our national economy.
I just love how you're talking about that. That sounds amazing. It's a great strategy. One of the things about how you're going about talking to investors is by saying we got something that what you regularly invest in can't offer. And
Right.
that's, in a way, you're not asking for any favors. You're giving them an opportunity to jump in and be a part of something special.
Exactly. And even for investors that are looking for a little bit of a return, you know, uh, it changes the mindset that, this is a community that you can invest in. And through our approach of how we're engaging the community and giving them ownership, it actually mitigates the risk for an investor. If we're able to show that we have community residents actually investing in these projects, then it shows investors that the community really has ownership of this. And I don't see it now as risky.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that made sense, but yeah.
Absolutely. Maybe just one last question, Derek. And you've spoken to it a little bit already. But if you could perhaps just imagine what you're working on having come to fruition, and you're walking down the street in this, the world that you wish to inhabit is suddenly here. How does it feel to be there? What are you seeing happen?
Well, I have so many dreams of what that could look like, but what initially I see is a community thriving where residents feel safe and where children have a future. And when I think about walking down the street and what I want to see green spaces, I want to see families outside, communicating with their neighbors. I want to see community centers filled with kids and also have those centers filled with adults who want to talk about issues in their neighborhood. But again, not really talking about the issues, but again, continuing to talk about what's possible. I imagine walking down the street and seeing a young musician playing the saxophone on the street and playing some tunes. I see locally owned restaurants with food that actually expresses the culture of the people who live there. Businesses that are owned locally, and a little league baseball field where on the outside of the field you see banners of all of those local businesses that are contributing to that little league baseball team. You're never going to see Amazon or Walmart on on the fences of those little league baseball fields, but I could keep going. That's I see a place where a young person can actually work, get educated, and live a healthy life in their own neighborhood.
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. Let's close there for now. Thank you very much, Derek, for sharing some of your story. I know even from our brief conversation before today that there's so much more that you could share and say. So very much appreciate your offering the piece of it that you were able to offer today. So we're going to take a very short break now for 60 or 90 seconds, and then Derek and Sean and I will be back to explore a little bit about what is shaping up in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Not Alberta. Maybe it was a manifest destiny. Maybe you're moving in that direction. You'll subsume Alberta. Anyway, we'll take a short break. We'll come back and explore a few connection points and hear from Sean.
If you would like to experience genuine connection with others, being heard, patience, levity and laughter, warmth, light, smiles, new, deepening, and healing relationships, then cultivate community with us. Coined by participants as a fortnightly feast for the soul, these 90-minute gatherings hosted by Axiom News offer a weaving of small group dialogue led by carefully crafted questions, followed by light, whole group reflection. Each dialogue round deepens connection and enlivens possibility between and amongst those who participate. All are welcome. Learn more and RSVP for our next gathering by visiting the Events tab in A New Commons, our sister initiative in Mighty Networks, at anewcommons.mn.co/events.
All right, we're back. Sean, I was wondering, and Derek, when you were speaking about the way you're looking at seeing the investment fund come together, you had a phrase for it. But I wonder, Sean, if you've heard the phrase Derek's used, and whether Derek, you've heard this phrase community bonds, because we've had a few guests on our show so far that are working with community bonds as a way for communities to invest directly in their communities. I wonder if it's a similar concept or if they're very different. Do you have a sense for that, Sean?
Yeah, and what Derek is talking about is community bonds. There was last week we had Tapestry Capital. Look on the YouTube channel for that conversation for listeners that are interested in that. They've raised over $100 million, mostly in Southern Ontario, for projects very similar to what Common Good Alliance is talking about. Yeah, he nailed it. It's great. And one of the things I love about these conversations, Peter, here I am in Winnipeg. I've never met Derek before. And wow, like we can see this shift, I think, from a place of scarcity where there isn't enough, and where like nonprofits are fighting each other to get limited amount of resources, and it's either environment or economic growth, or it's compassion or economic growth, those old ways of looking at things. And we're moving into a society where we can see we have enough. We have the abundance. Derek's talking about, what if there's $100 million a year in local spending? Well, what happens if we convert a bunch of that to local businesses? That's an approach of abundance. We have the tools. What if we went to investors and said, hey, we'll give you a small rate of return, financial rate of return, but we got something else for you that you're really going to like on top of that. And we're going to make you feel good. We're going to put a soul into your money.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're not investing in something that's far away that you'll never have any contact with, and who many investors in the public markets don't even know what the businesses they're invested in do, much less the people who work in them.
Yeah, and if they look, they might find it's very exploitative.
Absolutely. Profits are very expensive if they're cut out in dividends rather than plowed back into a community economy. So, yep, absolutely. So, Sean, you've got and one of the things I really appreciate about the folks that we are becoming increasingly connected to and hearing from is I would almost say it's a deep pragmatism. Like we're not talking broad political philosophy, we're not talking ideology, we're talking about things that are happening on the ground using tools that are at our disposal that to a large degree I don't know that communities are in the main even aware of. And yet here we are, we're seeing that the practicalities of it, we know that it works, and we're shifting attention as much as we can to those things that are pragmatic and are working to build the communities we care about. So, Sean, you've got this idea of outcomes purchasing, and you've been working on. And I just want to make. I think that outcomes purchasing, in my mind, is a little different from social procurement. They're sort of both in the same vein, but they're structured a little bit differently. You're making some progress, from what I understand, in advancing that cause in your hometown. What are you able and willing to share about what's taking shape around outcomes purchasing, and maybe a quick note about what it is? There's plenty more we can point people to around the concept of outcomes purchasing. Once you get it, it's super simple, but it can take some time to get your head around it, as I can attest to from my own personal experience. So, Sean, maybe a little bit about the progress and the idea you're attempting to make progress on.
Well, let's take a quick step back. First of all, the subject matter is police financing, so I'll leave that there as a bit of a teaser. But to go back several years, I co-founded, along with others, just like Derek has, a nonprofit called Build, B-U-I-L-D, and hiring people with criminal records to work in the trades. Build, in many ways, has been my faculty since 2006. I'm listening carefully and learning what it needs to be successful. The more successful Build is, the more people it can hire and move into the labor market, and they can pay their own bills and participate in society just like I do and my kids do, because my privilege has given me access to opportunities that others haven't had. And in the beginning, we just thought, well, there's one kind of money that nonprofits can access, and it's funding. And it's good. Take it if you can get it. We quickly realized that within a couple of years that we needed to be doing contracting. We needed to be going to government and saying, "Well, take your funding, but we also want to compete on construction work, particularly in your public housing agency, that we can do just as well as the private sector for the same price, but we're going to add in something that they can't deliver, and that is the fact that we're going to hire their tenants." And so we just noted right away that there's this huge difference between how the relationship with government with funding and the relationship with procurement, selling, drywalling, and painting, and apartment renovations, and things like that.
And you've described the difference to some degree being the first funding being very colonial, top down, directive, command and control, whereas in a business transaction, there's a little bit more equality. There's making deals. There's a negotiation that's a little bit different in tone than it is in a funding environment.
Everything about it is different, really. And governments value what they buy. They don't value what they fund in the same way. And so the administrative levels differently. With funding, they want to see your receipts. You get the money up front. You don't get paid for the value of what you're doing. The relationship is about the spending of the money. But with the procurement, we did the drywalling job, and then we got paid, and it's like, oh, there's some money left over. We can do what we want with it, what our board might want to do with it. We started a driver's training program, for example, or raised the wages of people that we're hiring. Things that nonprofit would want to do. So that's all unfolding and will continue to unfold. And you're right, Peter. We would normally define that as social procurement, but we realized that, wait a minute, the main financial value of doing this drywall has got nothing to do with the drywalling at all. It's the fact that we're reducing the number of people in the back of police cars.
Mm.
And so the funding thing's just not working. To have that conversation about value that Build can have with the Winnipeg Police Service. And so, as many of your listeners know, I ran for mayor recently, and I came short in total number of votes, but I think we caught the city's imagination about using some of these new tools. And so the new mayor, Scott Gillingham, and I are getting along very well. And we are in the middle of pitching to the Winnipeg Police a procurement arrangement. And I'll explain it as simply as I can. There's many nuances. But it's this, asking them, make a list of people that are costing you $5,000 a month or more. And would you agree to pay $3,000 a month for every month that you don't see them? And make that agreement in the form of a procurement relationship with.
And these are people that the police are in
nonprofit.
contact with, and that contact is costing $3,000 to $5,000.
Yeah, it's costing them $5,000 to $40,000 a year.
Right.
And a month, I should say, and they're agreeing to pay $3,000 a month for every month you don't see them. Well, you multiply $3,000 a month times 12. That's enough for a wraparound supportive housing, customized intervention. It's more than enough for supportive employment, putting people to work in the trades, for example, if that's something that they're interested in. And we can offer all these things that other contractors wouldn't, such as parenting, trades-based tutoring, financial literacy, anger management, reconnecting with kids, housing supports, all these things that we know people need to thrive.
And an ongoing sort of nestling in community as opposed to striking and violent emergency contact with authorities.
Yeah, and we're explaining to the police, this isn't about how you respond to police, a request for police dispatch. This is about preventing the dispatch from even occurring in the first place. So it's a whole other conversation. And I realized, Derek, and you'll probably be interested in this. So we live 6 hours north of Minneapolis. And when I was in Minneapolis recently, went to George Floyd Square. And first of all, when you're describing the arts and culture, the reclamation of land, wow, it's all there in George Floyd Square. You can feel the rage and the love in equal amounts. And I stood there where George Floyd died, and I said, wow, we couldn't get a defunding package through city council, even in Minneapolis. How do we change this conversation? And Peter, I'm happy to tell you, we will change this conversation, and it's going to come out of Winnipeg, and we'll break that news as it comes on Axiom News Live. But I tell the listeners today, things are going very well. We're moving firmly in the direction of offering something that's far better than, the solutions that people think are available now, which is, defunding or funding, keeping going the way we're going, which neither is getting us building the world that we want to live in.
So it sounds to me like some of the wins for community would be, I think you've described those very clearly. Wins for police could be decreased cost plus availability for resources to do the things that they're actually preferred to do and are built to do.
Reduced response times are very important to them.
Right on. Okay. And for the city, healthier communities, money better spent.
Yeah, a reduction in the city, it's a reduction in the future increases that the police are going to need in order to keep up. It's a significant increase in revenue for nonprofits that are acting entrepreneurially So we're not
Which
talking
is another shift, right? We talk about mindset shifts and culture shifts. For a nonprofit to think entrepreneurially is another shift that you're cultivating.
Derek was leaning right into that. That's why I asked the question about, 5 years ago we were just talking and now we're doing, and the doing is everything you talked about, Derek, was very entrepreneurial from the nonprofit community sector.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
a combination of these two things. We're not saying, oh, well, we're going to privatize jails and that'll really be a big improvement. It's ridiculous, right? But we are saying, hey, we're not giving away our outcomes anymore. Build has saved the Winnipeg Police maybe dozens of millions of dollars over the years,
Over
and
the years.
we've never received a nickel from the Winnipeg Police. Now they love Build. They've been great to us in so many ways. They often have people on our board, Indigenous police officers sitting on Build's board. They love the fact that we're a diversion program, but they've never had a tool to engage us on a business level because we've never offered that commodity. Now we're offering a commodity. It's reduced dispatches, and the more we deliver, the more we get paid. And back to what Derek's talking about, it's an opportunity for investors to say, my investments are sucking the soul out of me. And my partner Fiona and I were looking on the news one night, and it's like, we can't do this anymore. Like, have our money invested in things that are causing problems. And it's great to have financial vehicles, exactly what you're talking about, Derek, so that we know what our money's doing and it makes us happy. And isn't that important to just be happy? And that's what I'm leaning into here in Winnipeg.
And Peter
Well, you
Block
said
was,
that earlier. Sorry, you said that earlier. I mean, I think it's really just kind of a link to what can be better done, but it's a diversion of resources to that well-being economy that those savings can be directed towards.
Yeah, and I think we're approaching the police because it's procurement. We're not asking them to fund anything because funding to them means a continued increase in their workload, but a decrease in the amount of resources they have to respond. And it also means when they fund something, they're actually subsidizing the health department and the justice department. So we're just asking them, will you pay the financial benefits that your system is enjoying? And it's the beginning of the path to reduce the percentage of the police budget that's spent on policing. And we will see a shift of resources into the nonprofit sector. But the nonprofit sector is not, as far as the police are concerned, they're not delivering love and compassion or delivering a reduction in police dispatches. And that's what they're buying. They're not going to buy hugs. They will buy what hugs do.
Well, it's interesting that I'm a bit surprised that this is our 7th show or so, and I'm a bit surprised by how often finance and those structures for finance come up. Like Peter Block is known to both of us, and I've heard him say more than once that there will always be money for things that are valued, and yet the vehicles and the structures and approaches need to be in place, and we need to be aware of them, and they have to be functioning. And the kinds of things you're talking about, Derek, and that you're pioneering as well, Sean, are putting those structures into place that can reorient the way our economies work for the benefit of community. So we've got a couple minutes left. Why don't we open up a three-way circle just to explore? Maybe we can go to you, Derek, first. What's alive for you now, or what struck you about our time together so far?
Well, what Sean delivered around these community bonds have really got the light bulbs going off, and so there's also been conversations around creative ways for procurement. So these are all kind of I really enjoyed being invited to this conversation because I actually learned something. But yeah, that's initially what's grabbing me right now is just kind of wanting to learn more about these community bonds and these creative practices for procurement.
Yeah, I think maybe just for listeners' sake, we've talked about community bonds. What was the phrase you used for the financial structure you were talking about, Derek? How did you call that?
It's called a DCIF, which stands for Diversified Community Investment Fund.
Diversified Community Investment Fund. So I'd be interested in hearing, looking at the parallels there. So there's community bonds, DCIFs, social procurement, and outcomes purchasing.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to make this the business section of social economy, but those are those are four components of a social value marketplace. I think to chunk out and say they're a little bit distinct from one another, just for the sake of
That's
viewers
what
that
Derek
might
said
not.
right off the hop, the economics of compassion. Like,
Right.
but when we look at these tools, the compassion helps us outcompete status quo.
Yes.
So,
Right.
Yes.
and Derek, I've been working in the nonprofit sector. I don't have money like some people do, but the minute you launch that, we call it a community bond. You've got a different name for it. You think we're talking something new? You got it nailed. I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
maybe there's some mechanisms that we're using in Canada that can make that real easy. But I'm telling you right now, I want to invest in what you're doing, and we'll bring that to our listeners and to our community and say, hey, here's an opportunity to pull your money out of extractive resource economies and put it into the economics of compassion. I'm loving what you're onto, and I hope you'll come back and update us from time to time, because we've all got lots to learn from your path.
Well, yes, and I would love to come back, and I think this has been a great conversation. I just want to leave you all with one more thing. It's also a concept of where renters can really earn equity, and so we're playing out with this thing where residents invest by participating in the business of the management of the properties that they live in.
Love it.
And then we're creating a dividend housing fund where socially conscious people invest in real estate to lower rents in the private market and then keep the housing permanently affordable. And we're calling that dividend housing. So would love for you to invest in that too.
Another one, dividend housing.
So, Peter, we need buttons. It's like when we got the feels. So just
Right.
we'll
Okay,
lean
we'll
on
work
that.
on that. We'll work on that. Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
love that.
Okay. Well, why don't we say we're coming to a close now? Thank you very much, Derek, for joining us, and
Thank you.
Sean. Always a pleasure to be with you. And I imagine we're all going to cross paths again as the weeks and months unfold upcoming. So thank you both very much for joining us. You are indeed each doing wonderful work in the world. I thank you both for what you're making possible for our communities, and got to say, you're creating the worlds we all wish to inhabit. Beautiful. Thank you very much. All right, with that, we'll call our show closed for now. My name is Peter Pule. I've been your host, and you can find us at axiomnews.com, on Twitter, and on Facebook.